I have a burger right here, so I could do a mukbang, but problem is, the thought of people watching me eat really freaks me out, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to save this for after I'm done with this video, because that does not sound appealing to me. Like, who would want to watch me eat? Hey guys, it's Maddie. Welcome back to my channel, and if you're new here, then welcome. Today, we're going to be doing a controversial video. We're going to be talking about my most disappointing and my worst books I read in 2018. As I mentioned in my best books that I read last year, I really read so many great books in 2018. There were only like just a handful of books that I really didn't like or really disappointed me. But I read over 100, not over, I read exactly 100 books last year. And when you read that many books, there's bound to be a few books that you're not going to like. That's just how it goes. So I do have a few books that I really didn't like that I'm going to talk about today. But before we begin, I have to put in the usual disclaimer. If I mention a book you love, that's like your favorite book, it's not a personal attack on you. These are just my opinions, but we should all be mature enough to understand that we all have opinions. Not a personal attack on you. This is just my thoughts on these books. Alright, so let's just get into my top 10 list. The first 4 books that I'm going to mention were all books that weren't the worst, but they just really disappointed me. I had higher expectations for them and they let me down. And then my top 5 are the worst books that I read this year. So starting off with number 10, we have Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda by Becky Albertalli. I read this book in December, so I just recently read this book, and I just thought it was okay. This book has been hyped up for so long. There was a movie, so lots of people are talking about it, so I was expecting more from it, but it ultimately let me down a little bit. It wasn't terrible. I love the main character, Simon. He's very interesting, very funny, and really an entertaining character, but the plot of it is like any other YA contemporary book I've read, so it just wasn't special. It's something that's been done before. The only thing that was unique about this to me specifically is I don't read a lot of LGBT books, and that's something I want to work on in 2019, to read more books in that category. So the romance aspect was a little new to me, and I did like that, but most of the plot I just didn't care for. I found some of the side characters to be really annoying, so it just disappointed me. I expected so much more from it. At number 9, I have Starcrossed by Picmonkey. I had high expectations for this book because Picmonkey is the author of the Forget Tomorrow trilogy, which is a trilogy I really, really loved. So I was really excited to pick up this book from her because I loved her Forget Tomorrow trilogy, so I was pretty sure that I was going to like this. But the book was kind of underwhelming to me. This is a sci-fi book that takes place in space, and space sci-fi is a genre that I'm not a big fan of. I haven't read a lot of space sci-fi books, but I have seen space sci-fi movies and I just never enjoy them. So I was kind of worried about that with this book, that I wasn't going to like it because of that, and that ended up being true. The space sci-fi thing was just too much for me. And it's overall really a forgettable book. Like, I read this book in November and I can't remember most of it. Can't remember the characters' names. Can't remember any of the plot. It was just pretty forgettable. I also felt like the romance was super underdeveloped. The 2 love interests were friends before the book, so I understand that they're going to get into a romance pretty quickly since they already know each other. So it's not insta-love, but when you're just thrown into these characters' relationship and they just start a romance pretty quickly, it's just hard to feel anything for it. So I wasn't a fan of the romance either. I will still pick up more of Picmonkey's books since I did love the Forget Tomorrow trilogy. I still want to keep giving her a chance, but this one was a miss for me, sadly. Next one, number 8, is a book by my favorite author, so it hurts to put her on this list. But since she is my favorite author, I expect a lot from her book, so any book by her that's under like a 4-star is going to be disappointing to me. And that is Tempting the Player by Jennifer L. Armentrout. This is the second book in her Gamble Brothers trilogy, which is a new adult series, or an adult series, I would say. This trilogy in particular isn't her best work. All the books are pretty like okay. I gave the first one 4 stars, the last one 4 stars, but the second one I gave a 3 stars, so it was pretty disappointing. The reason I wasn't into this book in the series as I was to the rest of the books is because, again, the romance felt so underdeveloped. I didn't feel anything for it. I felt like the 2 characters had no chemistry at all. I didn't understand why they liked each other. So the romance was the biggest downfall of this book, and since this is a romance book, it's a adult romance book. The main thing is the romance. If I'm not going to feel anything for the romance, then it's pretty much a bad or just a disappointing book. That was interesting since the male love interest is a famous baseball player. I can't remember what sport he plays. And I really like reading books about celebrities and celebrity characters. I find them so interesting. So I like that part about it, but didn't care for the romance. So I'm really sad that I didn't like one of Jennifer L. Armentrout's books. It was an okay book, but definitely not her best work. At number 7, I have The Wrath and the Dawn by Renee Ahdieh. Oh, I really wanted to love this book. I wanted to love it so bad. The premise to it sounded really interesting. It really made me want to pick up the book. This is a book that is in 1001 Nights retelling. It's about this girl who lives in this world where there's this boy king, and each day he takes a new bride, and at the end of the day he kills that bride. So he ends up taking her best friend as a bride and kills her. So she offers to marry the king and plans to kill him to get revenge for him killing her best friend. So I ended up giving this book a 3 stars, so it wasn't terrible. However, again, romance was not good. The main disappointments of all the books I'm talking about is the romances, because I expect a lot from a romance. I expect it to make me feel for the characters, but these romances just let me down, and this was one of them. The reason why I hated this romance, the main character would go from hating the love interest and like wanting to kill him since it's her plan to kill him, to the next page being like, I'm so in love with him. And it didn't really make any sense. She kept just switching back and forth on her feelings. I just wanted to shake her because I'm like, you need to make up your mind because you're confusing me. What do you feel for this guy? Do you hate him? Do you love him? Because you keep going back and forth, and it was just so frustrating. And again, it was another forgettable book. The plot was okay. I liked kind of the magic system going on in it. However, I do wish the magic system would have been expanded on because it was a little confusing, but I liked the direction it was going in. But overall, this book was just a letdown, and I will not be getting to the second book. I wanted to love this one so bad, so this one is probably one of my most disappointing books I read this year. At number 6 is Eleanor Park by Rainbow Rowell. I feel like this one is like a YA classic at this point. So many people have read it, so many people love it, but I wasn't a fan. The reason I didn't love this book as much as I wanted to is the main character. I really did not like Eleanor that much. She came across really pessimistic, and I understand that it is because she comes from a bad family background. I get that she's going to be moody and isn't going to be in the happiest spirits and is going to be pretty negative, but the negativity just really bothered me. It felt like in every situation where something was going good for her, she would still be just in a bad mood. So she was pretty much an unlikable character for me, which I like unlikable characters if they redeem themselves. But that wasn't the case for her. She was just always moody all the time, and I wasn't for that. And another thing I didn't like about her is that in her narrative, she would be completely racist to what's supposed to be her love interest, which is Park. Since he is Asian, there's one point in the book where she talks about his squinty eyes, and I thought that was very inappropriate, unnecessary, made me not like her character even more because she came across as pretty racist, so I didn't like that either. I've read like 3 Rainbow Rowell books and they've all disappointed me, so I'm just thinking like maybe her books aren't for me, even though I still want to try Attachments because that book sounds interesting, but I'm not inclined at any point soon to pick it up because her books just keep letting me down. I really wish I could love her books though because so many people love her work, but that's not the case for me so far. Okay, now we're getting into my top 5, which these I consider the worst books I read in 2018. I'm really nervous to talk about my next one. I avoid talking about this book as much as possible. because this is a book that so many people love and it's important to so many people, and I'm glad it means a lot to a lot of people that they could feel connected to it. I didn't, and I found parts of it to be kind of problematic. I'm like super nervous. Okay, so at number 5, I have The Hate You Give by Angie Thomas. Cue the mob, cue the pitchforks, because I'm so sorry to the people who love this book. But just hear me out, please. Okay, reasons I didn't like this one. I think the main reason is that it really frustrated me. I am familiar with the Black Lives Matter movement. I watched a few documentaries on it after I read this book because I was kind of curious to see what the movement was all about and how it worked. So I am familiar with that, and this book is inspired from the Black Lives Matter movement. But I felt like how the book handled that movement just wasn't executed really well. In the beginning, this isn't a spoiler because it's basically the synopsis of this book, but the main character's friend gets shot, and since he is of African-American descent, it's viewed as a police brutality case since it's believed the police officer shot him just based on the color of his skin. And I do recognize that these types of situations happen in real life. I've seen it on the news and it is terrible. I don't believe that anyone should be shot or killed just based on the color of their skin, and that does happen. However, how the book handled a situation like that just didn't seem right to me. And the reason being is that the person who got shot was acting really defiant towards the officer. He was not complying with his demands. He was just being really difficult. And when the police officer asks him to stay put while he goes to his cop car to like run his license, he ends up moving and doesn't follow his rules at all, and then he gets shot. When a police officer tells you to stay put, do not move, you do not move, because no matter what the color of your skin is, if you move, they're going to see it as a threat. So it just really frustrated me because the officer kind of had a reason to shoot him based on the fact that he was starting to see him as a threat because he was starting to move. He didn't know if he was taking out a gun, if he was taking out a knife, if he was going to do something dangerous. So that's kind of personally why I think he shot him. But throughout the book, everyone views this as the police officer shot him because of the color of his skin. When in most times, it doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. If you are defiant to an officer, if you move when they tell you not to, they're going to take action to protect themselves in self-defense. So I think this book would have been better if this character, the character who got shot, would have been cooperative with the police officer and still got shot. But since that didn't happen, I didn't really feel anything for the situation, and that is the main plot point of the book. And it would have been really more effective, and the book would have been better to me if we also got the police officer's point of view, because we never get his thoughts on why he shot this person. We only get what Star, the main character, thinks his motive was, but we never hear from his point of view. I think it would have been so cool and so interesting and better if we had gotten the point of view of the police officer so we could get more insight as to why he shot him. Like, what was his thinking process? Was it because of the color of his skin, or was it because he thought him as a threat and was trying to use self-defense? But we never get that. We never really know what the police officer was thinking, and I just wish we could have known that. I feel like the book would have been so much better to me. Also, I really didn't care for Stark's character at all, and the biggest reason why is how she tries to use her voice and tries to stand up for what happened to her friend, that it was wrong. She uses violence to settle that. She riots. At one point, she throws, I think it was a grenade at a bunch of police officers, and that's supposed to fix the problem. I just think that is such a wrong thing to teach teens and younger readers who are reading this book, since this is a YA book, that using violence is a way to solve your problems, because it's not. And that's not something you should ever do. I think what Star should have done is that she should have just used her voice. Maybe give a speech onto why she disagrees that police officer was only using self-defense when really he was being prejudiced towards her friend. But she just uses violence. And it was so frustrating because violence doesn't solve anything, and it's not the way you should go about trying to fix a problem. So really did not like her character because of that. So this one was super disappointing, and I did give it 2 stars since it was easy to read. I felt like the plot really moved along. I gave it 2 stars because of that, but everything else I just really didn't like. And I'm so sorry that I'm trashing this book because I know a lot of people love it. I'm just gonna move on so I don't have to talk about it anymore. At number 4, I have Scythe by Neil Shusterman. This is actually a pretty disappointing book. It's another disappointing one, but it's on my worst because really I didn't like one thing about it. So the only thing I kind of liked was one of the characters, which is Rowan. I found him kind of interesting, but everything else about it I did not care for. This book really intrigued me because it's about a world where you can't die, but to control the population there are these people called Scythes who just kill randomly. So I was really intrigued by the premise of this book. I thought it was going to be super action-packed, and I wanted to see how this world worked. But really this is a book that doesn't have a clear plot, has very mediocre characters, a romance that flat out sucks, and the worst part about it is its pacing is so bad. I found this book really repetitive. It is a book that's going to have a lot of killing since it's about these people who kill people to control the population. So I understood that there was going to be a lot of killing scenes, but all of the killing scenes were so repetitive. They were all really similar and they just happened back to back to back. There was no space in between these scenes to give us kind of a breather. This book would also talk about the rules of this world in regards to how the Scythes worked, and then it would contradict those rules within like the next few pages, so it didn't really make sense. It felt like really the book wasn't really well thought out, and the pacing was super slow. Nothing happens. There's training scenes that are kind of boring, characters that don't really go through a whole bunch of development but are still there that shouldn't even be there because they're not important, and a romance that is so underdeveloped that I felt absolutely nothing for it. I didn't understand why the 2 main characters were into each other because they had no chemistry whatsoever. You didn't get to see their romance developed. It just happened randomly. It didn't make any sense. So this one was super disappointing, especially since a lot of people really love this series, so I was thinking I was going to like it too because it sounded like a book that I was going to love, but I didn't, and I will not be continuing on with this series. I did give it a 2 star just because I liked Rowan, one of the main characters. He was kind of intriguing to me. I really liked hearing about his backstory, and I liked him as a character, but he's the only redeemable thing about this book. Everything else did not like. At number 3, I have a book that I actually did DNF, but I got through the majority of it, so I'm still putting it on this list, and that is What If It's Us by Becky Albertalli and Adam Silvera. This book was so boring. So boring. I listened to it on audiobook and I found myself spacing out through most of this book, and like my mind would just wander because it was so uninteresting to me. This is the book about these 2 characters who meet at a post office, and the first time they meet, it's like insta-love to a T. They are instantly into each other, and it turns out that they get separated, and so they don't have each other's number, they can't come in contact with each other, but when they do find each other again, they start going on dates, and each one ends up really bad. And yet they still try to meet up and kind of find a connection there, but yet at the end of the night, the date goes really bad. And that premise sounded interesting to me, but it's a hard sort of premise to pull off because it can make your romance really irritating, because since it looks like these characters aren't into each other, but you're kind of trying to force them to be into each other, but each date goes badly. So I understood that was going to be a really hard thing to pull off, but I was still interested to see how this book handled that sort of situation, and it did not handle it well. It wasn't really well executed. I felt like I was getting so irritated with these 2 characters because I'm like, if your date isn't working after like 5 times, give up already. Clearly you guys don't have any chemistry. You're not really into each other. You just think you are. Like, just let it go. You're wasting your time. But each time they would try again, and it just got so irritating. Like, can't you find someone else that you're going to be into and not waste your time with each other when really you don't feel anything for each other? The characters were really really flat. They hardly had any backstory. They were mediocre and just really uninteresting. Another thing that was so cringy about this book is that it had so many pop culture references. I am telling you, there was probably like a Harry Potter reference every other page. There were so many. There was also so many Hamilton references, and I've never seen Hamilton or read the Harry Potter books or watched the movies, so I did not get any of the references at all. And it just felt like these two authors were just trying to see how many Harry Potter references they could make. And it was so cringy. I'm just like, oh, just stop. This isn't necessary. We don't need these many references. So yeah, this one was pretty bad, pretty cringy, terrible romance that I did not care for at all. Now we're at number 2. I actually thought this was going to be my worst book of the year, but another book came along that I absolutely despise, so this one was saved from being the worst book of the year. And most of you probably know how much I dislike this book because I have a whole rant review about it that I will leave linked on the screen if you want to check it out. But that book is Fangirl by Rainbow Rowell. Oh boy, this book aggravated me so much. I won't talk much about it since I do have a review on it, but the reasons why I didn't like it, did not like the main character at all. She was so pessimistic, so negative, and really whiny. This book is about a character who has anxiety and social anxiety, and I thought I would relate to that, but I found the anxiety aspect of this book really unrealistic to the point where I couldn't relate to it at all, and her anxiety just made her come off as annoying. And the way her anxiety was portrayed was not really how it happens in real life at all. I liked Levi, who's the love interest at first, but then he does something in the middle of the book that just completely ruined his character for me and made me really dislike him, which is so disappointing because I was into his character, but then he does this one thing that is just so terrible that I ended up despising him, and I was so disappointed in him. And ultimately, I was shocked that I didn't like this book because I am someone who loves YA contemporary and YA contemporary romance. So the fact that I didn't like this, one of the most popular YA contemporary books of all time, just really flabbergasted me. I was so disappointed in it, and I really wanted to love it, but unfortunately that just wasn't the case. So I'm really sad that I didn't end up liking it. Okay, we've now made it to the worst book I read in 2018. Just the thought of this book pisses me off so much. I hate talking about it, but I kind of want to talk about it, and I'm kind of excited to because it'll allow me to let off some steam, because even though I read this book in the middle of the year, it's still, oh my gosh, it still is in my mind, and my feelings for it are just bottled up because I hated it so much. Okay, the book was Beautiful Disaster by Jamie McGuire. Oh boy. So I went into this book thinking that I'm either going to like it or I'm going to hate it, because this is a book that does tackle the subject of abuse and abuse in a relationship. So I didn't know if it was going to handle that topic in a way that showed that the abuse was problematic and that it was bad and recognize that, or if it was going to glorify abuse. And it was the latter. This book glorified abuse so much. So this one is about this girl who meets this guy when she's in college and starts a relationship with him, but come to find out that he is really moody and he is not a very good person, and he physically and emotionally abuses her, but she's still in love with him, and that is glorified throughout the whole book. Never is it challenged or shown in a way that it is bad, that it is recognized as a bad situation. Instead, we get a character who makes excuses to be with him, despite the fact that he torments her and makes her miserable. She's still somehow in love with him. She, at some point, tries to break up with him and will be broken up for a little bit, but then goes right back to him within like the next chapter, and this sort of thing happens over and over and over again. She'll stay away from him, but immediately goes back to him, and every time he says, I'm sorry, that he regrets what he did to her, she takes him back And then he does it again. So obviously he does not feel bad for what he does to her. He keeps doing it over and over again. He's so manipulative. And again, I like unlikable characters, but when they are shown in a romanticizing way, I don't like that. I don't like it at all. It's so problematic. And this book was just overall ridiculous. Oh my god, there were so many ridiculous scenes. There's one scene in here that was so cringy. It's like, I will never forget this scene because it was so bad. It was the most cringiest thing I've ever read. There's this one scene where they're like in the cafeteria at school, and out of nowhere, the main character, the love interest, the abuser, starts singing. And everyone, literally just talking about it, it is just so funny. So everyone around him starts singing with him. I'm literally cracking up. And it's like, it was exactly how you would think High School Musical is. Everyone just starts singing out of nowhere and like they start dancing. It was so bizarre. I will say that was really funny and that was probably like the best part of the book, but again, it was so cringy. It was just ridiculous. So ridiculous. So yeah, this book was bad. I actually did DNF this book, but this was another book that I read the most of it, so I did count it as still that I read it, but I was curious to find out how it ended, so I looked up the ending, and I'm so glad I decided to put this book down because the ending is horrible. It is so horrible. It just shows further how this book romanticized the abuse because everything turns out okay at the end of the book. And it is called Beautiful Disaster, so the author clearly recognized that this was going to be about these two characters who were in a toxic relationship, but it was glorified, it was romanticized, and that's what bothered me about it. So I really hated this book. In fact, I'm pretty sure this is the worst book I have ever read. In fact, I just pulled up my Goodreads and looked up, because I have a shelf of all the worst books I've read from each year. And the worst book I read in 2016 was Lady Renegades by Rachel Hawkins, and in 2017 it was Wild Beauty by Anna Marie McLemore. And I have to say that those books were better than Beautiful Disaster. Not by a lot, but still not as bad as this one was. So yes, Beautiful Disaster is the worst book I have ever read. I finally found the worst book I have ever read. It was that bad. I'd recommend just don't read it. Just stay away from it. It was terrible, especially if you are triggered by abuse and don't appreciate how abuse is sometimes glorified in books. Stay far away from this one because I'm telling you, you probably will not like it, and I definitely didn't. Big breaths after that. I feel so good after ranting about Beautiful Disaster because it bothers me so much. Oh, I hated it. These videos are always so hard because since I am a writer, I've recently gotten back into writing. I recognize how much work goes into writing a book. It takes so much time, so much effort, so trash talking books is so painful for me, even though it gives me a chance to vent. But I also want to say that I have no ill feelings towards any of these authors at all. I'm sure they're all wonderful people, but I just didn't enjoy their books. And that's how it is. We don't like everything. Every book is going to have negative opinions. It doesn't matter if it's the best book in the world. Even Harry Potter has terrible book reviews. Even though they're in the minority, it still has people who don't like it. So not everyone's gonna like books. These are just the books that I didn't enjoy. Okay, so now I feel like I'm rambling, so I'm going to wrap up this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Hope I didn't hurt anyone's feelings. Really hope so. Let me know in the comments what was the worst book you read in 2018. I would be really interested to know. If you liked this video and if I didn't scare you off with my negative opinions, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe down below for more bookish related videos. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter because I post a lot on there. And if you want to hear more from me outside of YouTube, you should check me out on there. I post every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Saturday. Even though today is Friday, but I missed my Wednesday post, so I'm making up for it right now. And with that said, I'll be back really soon. Bye! Harry Potter books.